Hello everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the vodcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again on this nice Sunday afternoon by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we this week, Steve?
I'm good, thanks, Ben. Hello, FiST Chat fans. It's lovely to be back again for another episode.
Absolutely. Hopefully no glitches in any tech while we're making it. We'll get onto that shortly because there's been a bit of talk of some tech fails over time. But before we get into that, don't forget our website, FiSTchat.com. You can get all of our links there. You can subscribe to our audio via iTunes, SoundCloud, and our RSS feeds, and our videos on YouTube, Vimeo, and Digicosm TV. We've got our ebook, The FiST Report, at fistreport.com, only 99 cents. Great read and helps us support the show. You can interact with us on Twitter, Google+, and Facebook. And we've got our supplementary content, the weekly blogs, photography on Instagram and Flickr. And please, if you think anyone might be interested in our weekly ramblings, then feel free to send them our way via our website. Now, we had a couple of articles this week in relation to top software fails in history, and it was sort of the topic was sort of instigated by a question that was asked by Bill Gates as to why Control-Alt-Delete was created in order to bring up the login screen in Windows. And his response, after a bit of waffling apparently, was that the IBM keyboard designer didn't want to give them a single key devoted to that. So this was like a workaround. And he said, in hindsight, that was probably a mistake. And that's really quite incredible, really, because, a login key, a key devoted specifically to that should have been a mandatory thing, you would have thought.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? We all are used to it now, and we all love Control-Alt-Delete, to get in and out of our computers, bring up the task manager, whatever it is. But yeah, I guess if Steve Jobs had his way, there would have always, only been that reset button. So it is interesting how these things impact, but you would have thought that certainly in the early days when they were building systems and the keyboard was very much part of the operating system, you would have thought that it wouldn't have been too much to add an extra key.
No, you wouldn't have thought that, but seemingly, like, what? And of Bill Gates, of all people, that he would just allow that to happen, whether they weren't in that stronger position at the time, maybe to sort of insist on it, because you couldn't imagine, say, Microsoft of the 90s just rolling over on a requirement that they want.
True. But you see, this is very much, these epic software fails are now coming back to sort of haunt the modern age of design teams. Because back in those days, we got what we were told we were going to get. So the crazy, nerdy, geeky IT guys, wherever they were at IBM, even if they're talking to another business like Microsoft, they held all the cards. I mean, that's the reason that there's this ridiculous HTTP, at the beginning of every web address. It's only been in the last few years we've been able to drop the www.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the World Wide Web. Yeah. What was the other option?
Yeah.
So, but you still had to type it in. And I think these are the sorts of tech thinkings that crept into sort of, a lot of software design, which caused it to fail. Certainly if you go back 10 years, I can think of very many professional software uses that I've had to use in entertainment and media, which were just really cumbersome. And if they had just had one key, or if someone had actually thought, I'm actually going to use this program myself, not I'm just going to tell other people how to use this program, a lot of these problems wouldn't have ever occurred.
I mean, it's interesting too. Just from some personal experience this week, just mentioning before I got on, I was having a bit of fun with Cloud and SkyDrive in particular, where the blog I wrote for last week, the first actual version I wrote disappeared off the cloud somehow, and I had to write it again, and I really hate that sort of thing, because as I was saying, the energy went into the first draft, and you can't get that back once it's gone.
No.
And sometimes I wonder, obviously glitches happen and that sort of thing, but there are obviously improvements that can be done there. And then as another example, people were very upset with Windows 8, not having a start menu with that disappearing and you can't boot straight to the desktop. And I've just been testing Windows 8.1 on my laptop just to see what it's like. It's not really that different, but you now can boot straight to the desktop, and now it's got a start button back. And you wonder, do they actually ask or sort of think about these things before they do them, or do they just say, "Oh, tough, we'll release it and see what happens"?
Well, I guess that's my point. In the old days, that's precisely what they used to do. So, and I don't blame them, but your techie guy would say, "Oh, actually, if you want to do this, well, you actually have to write a bit of code to make your computer work. Here's how you do it."
Yeah.
Today, there's no choice, because if you don't put that start button back on, because that's what the public want, people go and use something else, and there are more and more alternatives now. I remember the early days of FTP. Now we've got the cloud. It's all done automatically through SkyDrive or iCloud or whatever system you're using. But in the old days, you had to do it physically, and you had to use all the commands. They didn't come up with an idea, hey, how about let's just use a simple command which says, send FTP, No, they didn't. It was a lot more complicated than that. So, we live in this world now where if you don't like, the way Excel works, or the way that SkyDrive backs up Excel, you've got Google Docs.
And that's all you've got.
Well, it's not a great choice.
But still, the option's there.
The option's there. So, they really can't afford anymore to not take in the end user experience. I mean, look, a good example of that has both been Nokia and BlackBerry.
Yeah.
Where they gave us great products, 10 years ago. But now the consumer wants simple, easy-to-use stuff. Despite the fact people tell you otherwise, they do want Metro. They do want an iOS. And Android, as funky as it is still pretty easy to use. They don't want clunky, menu-driven, three-action, software anymore. It's got to be to the point. It's got to happen straight away.
Absolutely. Oh, well, we can't have this discussion without at least mentioning the Y2K bug, because that was a really big one at the beginning of the century and caused all sorts of hysteria and predictions of doom and gloom that, every computer on the planet would fail and critical systems would go offline. And it's interesting that it all really just came down to, a lazy shortcut, and which... again, maybe it wasn't foreseen any potential problems that would come out of it, because, that maybe that's 30 or 40 years down the track. We'll worry about it then. Well,
they should have been able to fix it, and they did. Admittedly, if computing technology hadn't advanced, if we hadn't got to Windows 95 before the year 2000, the world probably would have collapsed. But, it just so happened that by the 90s, I think that, it was only very old software, which was probably due for replacing anyway. It was mainframe stuff, I think, that had the issues. But they did their workarounds. All they had to do was make sure that when the date reset, it didn't crash.
Yeah, exactly.
But there was a lot of money made.
Oh, there always is. All right, we might move on from that. But just finally, I think it's important to note, though, that, these techies are just human as well. So, you'll get great innovations, say like the iPhone, or or even say the Windows operating systems of the 90s that kind of really push things forward for computing. And on the flip side, those very same companies will come up with, say, a Vista or a Apple Maps application that is really buggy and doesn't work properly. So it's a bit of both. They can't do everything perfectly all the time.
Well, yeah, exactly. And just to add to that, let's look at even our smart televisions today. They're made by television people. You have a look at some of the interfaces that they have.
Yeah. Not intuitive at all.
They are so 1990s.
Exactly. All right, we might move on to our news bites now, and I thought you'd like our first film news bite in the sense that it's a new GoPro Hero camera, the 3 Plus camera, and there's an iOS update for that. So for all the extreme sports filmmakers or anyone who just wants to strap a GoPro to their head as they're walking around town, you've got a new GoPro that you can use. Did you see that, Steve? Did you kind of like anything there? Do you think it's a huge improvement? Because you've still got the last version, don't you?
Yeah, I've still got the 3 silver. Look, I think every GoPro is going to get better, isn't it? And well, I love the GoPro, Ben. I mean, you know, it's a step ahead now, and every time they get better. It's a cheap camera. It's a great camera. Not quite sure how anyone's going to use a lot of the 4K features. Maybe you can answer that. But apart from that, look, every model will get better and better. And I reckon in another couple of generations, there's no excuse for everyone not to have one just like a phone.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we might move on to our science news bite now, and this one was sent into us by Liam, a regular contributor, aka LJ on Google+. Humans to blame for global warming. This particular one was from The Verge, although many media sites ran this particular story. A UN panel of climate change experts announced that mankind is almost certainly to blame for global warming. Really? That's that's not too surprising. And they were saying it's asserting its claim with 95% certainty, and it's extremely likely that more than half of the observed increase in global average surface temperature from 1951 to 2010 was caused by an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations. The best estimate of the human-induced contribution to warming is similar to the observed warming over this period. Now, I think we haven't spoken in this for a while, but you know, the climate change debate kind of goes in ebbs and flows, and it's gone into a period where I think it's gone on the back burner a bit. And it's funny, I just kind of think when this sort of thing pops up, it's sort of like they're trying to stoke the fires again to remind people.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been a lot of controversy because the IPCC have changed, you know, what their modelling predicted and all that sort of thing. And I personally find it very tiring. You know, as we've always said on FiST Chat, you know, it's happening. You know, if you don't want to deal with it, or if the public doesn't want to deal with it, well, then we'll all suffer the consequences. But there isn't much in the way of choice, except, you know, you've got to find an alternative to fossil fuel. That this is what this really comes down to, and there are reasons to find alternatives to fossil fuel besides global warming. But there's no question the activity that we're doing and the carbon-based pollution that we're creating is in fact changing the atmosphere, is changing the chemistry of the air around us, just because you can't see the air around you and the way that it interacts with everything that lives on the planet as well as the oceans. Just because we can't see that, we tend to want to say that it's something else, but we're changing the chemistry of our environment, and by changing that chemistry, we will change the climate.
Exactly. And just finally, our tech news bite. This one's more in the fun category from Discovery News. Do nothing, remain still, receive beer. Bulgarian advertising firm Next Digital Creative Agency launched a vending machine as part of its recent Amstel Pause campaign. Passerbys are lured to the vending machine by red velvet ropes, where they're instructed to stand in one spot and push a red button that rings a bell and starts the timer. Users must remain still. Any movement will trigger a motion sensor and reset the timer. After a successfully idle 3 minutes, out pops a can of beer. Wow. Is this a different way of doing market research, maybe?
Well, that's what technology should be used for, Ben. Beer. So it's a great idea, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you can stay still for that long, you probably deserve a beer. That's hard work.
Oh, exactly right. But it's just interesting. Apparently, on its 16-day debut tour across Bulgaria, the campaign had given out 1,344 beers. But it's fascinating. It's I'm just wondering who would have what the meeting would have been like when they thought up that idea.
Who knows, especially out in the east out there. But yeah, good on them. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we might wrap it up there. So thanks again, Steve, for the chat.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, FiST Chat fans. Tweet us with your favourite beer or how long you'd stand still for one.
Absolutely. All right, so that's it for this week's episode. So we'll catch you next time.